This is the story of a woman who steps off a stagecoach and unknowingly walks into the only future she has left. The first scream barely made it through the wind. It was torn apart almost as soon as it left her throat, shredded by the red dust storm rolling across the Texas panhandle like a living thing. Calder Boone reined in hard, his horse skidding sideways as grit stung his eyes and teeth. The sky had gone the color of rusted iron, the sun reduced to a dull, swollen smear behind the dust. Visibility was no more than 20 yards, and getting worse by the second. He hadn't planned on being out this far from Red Creek Ranch so late in the day. The fence line near the South Flats had needed checking, and Calder had learned long ago that plans meant little once the land decided otherwise. Still, something about the sound had cut through him sharper than the wind. It hadn't been the cry of an animal, he knew those well. This had been human, desperate, broken. Calder swung down from the saddle, boots sinking into loose earth. "Hello," he called, his voice swallowed immediately. The wind answered with a low, constant howl, carrying the smell of dust and something else beneath it. Iron blood. He took a few steps forward, shielding his face with his arm. Then he saw her. She lay half curled in a shallow depression, dress torn, hair matted dark against the red ground. One arm was twisted beneath her at a wrong angle. The other stretched out as if she'd tried to crawl and failed. Blood streaked her temple and dried along her cheek, already caked with dust. Her chest rose and fell in short, shallow pulls, each breath sounding like it hurt. For a moment, Calder just stood there. The land had a way of hardening a man. It taught you to step past dead cattle, past broken fences, past the things you couldn't fix. But this wasn't a thing. This was a woman left to die in the dirt, and the sight of her cracked something old and dangerous open inside his chest. He knelt beside her, careful, slow. "Mom," he said, loud enough to cut through the wind. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, green eyes opened, unfocused, glassy with pain. Her lips moved, no sound at first. Calder leaned closer. "Hubbard," she whispered. The name hit him like a fist. Wade Talbot, cattle baron, owner of half the grazing land between here and Dustwell. A man who smiled too easily and broke things when he didn't get his way. Calder had crossed paths with him before, and every time had ended with Calder walking away before his hands remembered what they could do. "Easy," Calder said, though his jaw had gone tight. "You're safe now." That was a lie. He knew it the moment he said it. Her head rolled slightly to the side, breath hitching. He'll come," she murmured. Then her eyes closed and her body went slack. Calder didn't waste time. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders as best he could, cursing softly when she groaned at the movement. She weighed less than she should have, too light in his arms, as if the world had already been taking pieces of her long before today. The wind shoved at him as he stood, red dust coating his skin, his hair, his teeth. He carried her to the horse, settled her carefully against the saddle, and mounted behind her, one arm locked around her middle to keep her upright. As they turned back toward Red Creek, the storm thickened. The land disappeared into shifting walls of red, familiar landmarks swallowed whole. Calder leaned low, trusting his horse more than his eyes, following memory and instinct the way he always had. He felt the woman's breathing against his arm, shallow but steady enough to keep hope alive. Hope was a dangerous thing. By the time the ranch came into view, dusk had fallen hard. The storm began to thin, leaving the world coated in rust and shadow. Red Creek Ranch sat on its slight rise, weathered but stubborn, the house crouched against the wind like it had something to prove. A thin line of smoke curled from the chimney. Ma Hattie saw him first. She stepped out onto the porch, apron still tied, one hand shading her eyes. "Calder Boone," she called. "You look like hell, even for—" She stopped when she saw the shape slumped against him. "Lord have mercy." Calder dismounted carefully. "Get Doc Ellery," he said, his voice low but firm. "Now." Ma Hattie didn't ask questions. She never did when it mattered. She was already moving, calling for Jude as Calder carried the woman inside. The house smelled of coffee and soap and old wood, the kind of smells that told you life went on here, steady and unremarkable. He laid the woman on the spare room bed, hands gentle despite the way his chest felt too tight to breathe. Doc Ellery arrived within the hour, breathless and dusty, his bag thumping against his leg. He sucked in a sharp breath when he saw her. "Good God," he muttered, already rolling up his sleeves. "What happened?" "Found her out by the South Flats," Calder said.
Beaten.
The doctor's mouth thinned as he examined her, broken wrist, cracked ribs, bruising that bloomed dark and angry beneath his fingers. He worked in silence for a long time, the only sounds the clink of instruments and the woman's occasional, pained breaths.
She's tough,
Doc Ellery said finally.
Tougher than most. But she was close. Another hour out there.
He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Calder stood by the window, watching the last of the storm blow itself empty across the land. The red dust settled slowly, like ash after a fire. He should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was the weight of the name she'd spoken, Talbot. Ma Hattie cleaned the blood from the woman's face with a gentleness that surprised anyone who didn't know her.
"What's her name?"
she asked quietly. Calder shook his head.
"Didn't say."
As if summoned by the question, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened again, clearer this time, though pain still shadowed them. She looked around, confusion flickering into fear when she tried to move and couldn't.
"Easy,"
Calder said, stepping closer.
"You're at my ranch, Red Creek."
Her gaze found his, sharp despite everything.
"Why?"
she asked, one word loaded.
"Because you needed help."
She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of that.
"My name's Lena,"
she said at last.
"Lena May Coulter." "All right, Lena."
Cowed.
"You're safe here."
Her lips pressed together, something bitter and knowing in the movement.
"No,"
she said soft.
"I'm not."
Doc Ellery straightened, glancing between them.
"She needs rest,"
he said.
"And she needs to stay put. Whoever did this." "Wade Tell."
Lena said, her voice steady now.
"He thinks I stole from him. I didn't. But that didn't matter."
The room went very still. Ma Hattie crossed herself. Doc Ellery swore under his breath. Calder felt the familiar pull of anger, slow and heavy, settling into his bones.
"I told you,"
Lena continued, eyes never leaving Calder's face.
"He'll come."
Outside, the wind died completely, leaving an uneasy quiet in its place. Calder looked out at the darkening land, at the long road leading away from Red Creek Ranch, and knew with a certainty that chilled him more than the storm had. This wasn't over. It had barely begun.
"This ain't just a woman in trouble,"
Calder muttered to himself as night settled in.
"This is a war walking through my front gate."
The morning broke quiet, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and chamomile. Inside Red Creek Ranch, the spare room carried the hush of a sick room, the kind of silence that hangs like a question. Calder Boone stood at the window, arms folded, staring out at the fields beyond. The red dust storm had passed, but it left everything stained in its memory. Even the light seemed off, too still, too filtered, like the sky hadn't made up its mind about clearing. Behind him, Ma Hattie moved with her usual efficiency, wringing out a cloth and dabbing at Lena's brow.
"Fever's dropped a little," she muttered. "That's something."
Calder didn't respond. He hadn't slept, not a second. He'd sat by the fireplace through the night, rifle on his lap, mind grinding like millstones. Wade Talbot. The name sat in his gut like bad whiskey. He didn't know exactly what Talbot wanted with Lena May Coulter, but he didn't need every detail to know it was bad. Talbot was a man who didn't tolerate no. Calder turned as Doc Ellery came down the stairs, shrugging into his coat. The old man rubbed a hand over his tired face.
"She's stable. Lucky as hell you found her when you did. Another hour out there."
He trailed off, shaking his head.
"I've given her something for the pain. She'll drift in and out for a day or two. Let her. She say anything else?"
"Call." Doc nodded slow.
"Not much. Just that she has no family left. Said her folks died of fever last year. She's been working at the Painted Mare in Dustwell."
Calder frowned. That explained the dress, the weight loss, the look in her eyes when she woke. Saloon girls didn't last long in towns like Dustwell unless they were lucky or cruel.
"She mentioned Talbot?"
Doc asked, voice low. Calder nodded.
"Well,"
the doctor said,
"then you've got yourself a storm coming worse than yesterday's. You sure you're up for it?"
Calder's answer was simple.
He lays a hand on her again, he loses it.
Doc gave a short nod of approval and picked up his bag.
"Then I'll keep my rifle loaded, too."
When the doctor left, the house felt larger somehow, quieter in the wrong way. Calder walked into the room and stood at Lena's bedside. Her skin was pale under the bruises, lips cracked, lashes twitching against her cheeks as she fought whatever memories swirled behind her eyes. Ma Hattie glanced up at him.
"You planning on staying here all day?" Got nowhere else I need to be,
he said. She didn't argue, just wrung the cloth again and said,
let her know she's not alone when she wakes.
By late afternoon, the fever had dropped enough that Lena stirred more often. Her eyes would flutter open, scan the room, land on Calder with wary recognition before sleep pulled her back under. It wasn't until dusk that she really came around. She woke with a sharp gasp, the kind pulled from the gut, the kind born in nightmares. Calder was there before she could sit up.
Easy,
he said.
You're at the ranch, Red Creek. You've been out for almost a day.
She blinked, chest heaving, and then sagged back into the pillows with a groan.
Hurts,
she whispered.
I'd be worried if it didn't,
he replied gently. Her gaze flicked toward him.
You always this charming.
Calder allowed a ghost of a smile.
Only for special company.
She gave the smallest huff of a laugh, then winced.
Cracked rib,
she muttered.
Forgot. You said Talbot did this.
Her face changed. Not fear, not exactly, something colder. Something that had been brewing a while.
You know him well enough to not like him.
She closed her eyes for a beat, then opened them again.
Then you know what kind of man he is. He didn't think I stole anything. That was just a reason.
Calder said nothing, letting her speak.
I started at the Painted Mare about 3 months back,
continued.
It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. And I needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't a ditch. Talbot started coming in regular. Always wanted me to serve him. Wouldn't take no.
Calder's hand tightened on the chair rail.
He ever?
She shook her head.
Not yet. But I saw where it was heading. Yesterday he came in drunk, angrier than usual. Claimed his coin pouch had been taken. Looked around like he already knew who he'd blame. Soon as his eyes landed on me, I ran. How far'd you get? Far enough to make him matter, she said bitterly. Not far enough to make him stop.
Ma Hattie entered with broth in a tin cup.
You need food,
she said not unkindly.
And then sleep. Storytelling can wait.
But Lena wasn't finished. She took the cup, sipping carefully, and looked back to Calder.
You should have left me out there. Would have saved you trouble.
Calder didn't flinch.
Not how I'm wired.
She held his gaze a beat longer, then nodded once as if cataloging that answer for later. That night, Calder sat in the front room, cleaning his rifle with slow, practiced movements. The storm outside had long since died, but another was brewing inside him. Not just for Lena, but for the weight she carried, the kind that left bruises no salve could reach. He hadn't been able to save his wife and son. That truth had carved itself into him like branding iron. But this woman, she was still breathing, still fighting, and now she was his responsibility, whether she wanted to be or not. Ma Hattie brought him a cup of coffee and sat across from him.
She's a tough one,
she said.
She'd have to be, he replied. You're thinking about Talbot. I'm thinking,
Calder said slowly,
that Dustwell's due for a reckoning.
Ma Hattie raised an eyebrow.
Don't do anything stupid. I'm not.
She sipped her coffee.
Just dangerous then.
He didn't answer. The fire crackled. Outside, the land settled back into its uneasy quiet. Inside, Calder's mind was already riding into town, already hearing Talbot's voice, already preparing for the sheriff's shrug and the saloon's silence. But first, he needed facts. He needed to know what the hell was going on in Dustwell. He looked toward the staircase where Lena was resting, his jaw clenched with something that felt like purpose, sharp and steel-lined.
She's not just a woman in trouble,
he said under his breath.
This whole town's been letting men like Talbot run wild too damn long.
And then, more to himself than anyone,
if I don't stand up now, I'm no better than the men who stayed quiet.
The next morning, before dawn, Calder saddled his horse. Ma Hattie met him at the door, arms crossed.
Heading to town. Not looking for a fight,
he said.
Just answer.
She stepped aside but added one last warning.
Don't go kicking rattlesnakes unless you're ready to get bit.
Calder tipped his hat.
Then it's time to see which one's still got fangs.
He rode out just as the sun crested the hills, red light spilling across the land like a promise. He didn't know what he'd find in Dustwell, but he'd come back knowing exactly what kind of fight he was in.
He didn't just beat me,
Lena had said.
He was getting ready to take everything.
And Calder Boone was done letting men like Wade Talbot take anything ever again. The town of Dustwell didn't look like much at first light. One wide dirt road flanked by squat wooden buildings, a row of hitching posts, and the occasional limp sign swinging on rusty chains. Most of the windows were still dark. The saloons, though, those always woke early, or maybe they never really slept. Calder Boone rode in slow, the clop of hooves on hard, packed ground echoing too loud in the silence. He passed the general store, the post office, the faded church. Nothing had changed. And that was the problem. Dustwell hadn't grown better. It had grown quieter. Quieter in the wrong way. Like everyone inside it had learned to swallow their voices. Calder had seen that kind of quiet before. In border towns where law was just a word painted on a drunk man's door. He stopped in front of the sheriff's office, tied his horse to the post, and stepped up onto the porch. The place looked like it always had, peeling paint, dust thick on the windows, a jail cell that hadn't seen a proper lock in years. Calder pushed open the door without knocking. Inside, Sheriff Ray Colson sat behind his desk, boots up, hat low, reading last week's paper like it might offer something new if he squinted hard enough.
"Well, I'll be,"
Colson drawled without looking up.
"Calder Boone. It must be Tuesday, 'cause that's about how often you show up."
Calder didn't smile.
"Morning, Sheriff."
Colson lowered the paper just enough to peer over the edge.
"You hear about rustlers, or something else?" "Something else,"
Calder said.
"Name's Lena Mae Coulter. You know her?"
Colson's eyes flickered just once.
"Heard of her. New girl at the Painted Mare. Worked there a few months. She's at my ranch,"
Calder said flat and clean.
"Talbot beat her near to death and left her in the dust. I found her bleeding out by the South Flats."
The sheriff leaned back, paper folding in his lap.
"That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's what happened." "And she told you Wade Talbot did this?" "She did."
Colson scratched at his beard, considering.
"Funny. 'Cause Talbot was right here in town yesterday evening. Played poker with 3 upstanding gentlemen till almost midnight. Reverend Holt among 'em."
Calder's mouth tightened.
"That doesn't mean he didn't send someone. Or that he didn't ride out before dark, then ride back in."
Colson gave a one-shouldered shrug.
"Maybe. Maybe not. Point is, unless you got someone who saw him do it, and they're willing to say it out loud, my hands are tied. That woman is covered in bruises and broken bones. And did she see him hit her? Or just assume it was him?"
Calder stepped closer to the desk.
"She named him. She said he'd been forcing his attention on her for months. This wasn't random."
The sheriff leaned forward now, boots hitting the floor with a thud.
"Look, Boone, I don't know what kind of hero streak you're on, but you're riding headfirst into a fire you can't put out. Talbot's got pull in this town. He's got land, money, men. He donates to the church, sponsors the rodeo, pays most of our taxes. You saying he's untouchable? I'm saying I got a badge, not a death wish."
Calder stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back.
"Then I guess you won't mind if I go asking around myself."
Colson smirked.
"Suit yourself. But don't come crying when doors slam in your face."
Calder didn't answer. He turned and walked out, letting the door creak shut behind him. The air outside felt thicker now, heavier. The morning sun had climbed higher, pulling more folks into the street, but no one looked his way. Dustwell had eyes, just not brave ones. He crossed to the Painted Mare, its red shutters already open, light and smoke filtering through the glass. The saloon never closed, not really. Calder pushed the door open and stepped into the stale warmth of whiskey and sweat. A few Cohans lounged near the bar, half drunk already or still drunk from the night before. A card game clacked lazily in the back. Behind the counter, Patrick Sullivan, the saloon owner, polished a glass that didn't need polishing. Sullivan looked up.
"Boone, don't often see you in here." "Don't often have a reason." "Whiskey?" "Answers."
The man paused, setting the glass down.
"What kind of answers?"
Calder leaned against the bar.
"Lena Coulter. I know she worked here. I know Talbot paid her too much attention. I know she's in a bed at my ranch because someone beat her half to death and left her to die."
Sullivan's face went still.
"I heard she was missing." "Not missing."
Calder.
"Hiding, healing. Terrified."
Sullivan swallowed, glanced around the room.
"You maybe want to take this to the back."
Calder followed him through a side door into a cramped office stacked with invoices and empty crates of rye. The door shut behind them. Sullivan poured a finger of bourbon but didn't offer any.
Look, she was a good girl. Worked hard. Never asked for much. Talbot took a shine to her, but she didn't reciprocate. He didn't like that. You see him lay a hand on her. Not directly, Sullivan said. But he'd corner her. Say things. Too close. One time she slapped him. Thought he'd strike her right there. Why didn't you stop him?
Sullivan's jaw worked.
What would you have me do, Boone? He's got the sheriff, the bank, and half the county in his pocket. He shuts me down. I got nothing. You let him drag her out of here. She ran,
Sullivan said quickly.
Slipped out the back while I was trying to keep him calm. He chased after her. That was the last I saw her.
Calder's voice dropped.
You saw all that, and still said nothing.
Sullivan looked away.
I figured she got out. I didn't think. She nearly died.
There was a beat of silence. Then Calder asked,
Did Talbot ever find his coin pouch?
Sullivan blinked.
Yeah, one of his men found it under the table later that day. Fell out of his own damn pocket.
Calder stared at him.
So the whole reason for chasing her down was a lie.
Sullivan nodded, shame clear on his face.
I didn't know till it was too late.
Calder straightened.
You'll testify.
Sullivan hesitated.
If it comes to that, yeah, I will.
Calder didn't thank him. He just walked out. Back on the street, the sun was high now. Dust hung thick in the air, kicked up by every boot and hoof. He mounted his horse slow, thoughtful. Sheriff Colson wouldn't act without pressure. Maybe not even then. But now he had something: witness, motive, proof the theft claim was false. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. As he turned toward the edge of town, his gut twisted. Wade Talbot stood at the corner of the general store, flanked by two of his men, a black hat pulled low over sharp eyes. He smiled when he saw Calder.
Boone,
he called out.
Heard you've been poking around like a stray dog.
Calder stopped the horse, expression unreadable.
Just asking question.
Talbot stepped closer.
You got something of mine. Not that I know of. That girl, she's a liar. A thief. She needs to answer for what she's done. She's no thief, Calder said. And she already paid.
Talbot's eyes hardened.
You think hiding her makes you noble. It makes you next.
The street went quiet. Even the wind seemed to hush. Calder leaned forward in the saddle, voice low.
You come near my land again, Talbot, I'll bury you in it.
Talbot didn't blink.
Big talk for a man standing alone. Who said I'm alone?
He didn't wait for a reply. He turned the horse and rode out, aware of every eye on his back, of the heat building in his blood. This was no longer a question of guilt or proof. It was a collision course, and Dustwell had chosen its silence.
He wants the girl, and he wants your land, and he don't like hearing the word no.
The trail to Reverend Ezekiel Holt's place wound west out of Dustwell and then curled south along a dry creek bed. Calder Boone rode it with a tight jaw and a heavier mind. The mid-afternoon sun slanting sharp over the land. The horse's hooves kicked up dust that clung to everything: boots, coat, thoughts. He didn't ride fast. No need. Reverend Holt wasn't going anywhere. The man had lived on the outskirts of town for nearly 20 years, in a small clapboard house with a rusted bell tower out back and a half, wild garden that refused to die. Most folks in Dustwell considered him an odd relic of better times, an old freedman who read scripture in a voice that could silence a room and fixed saddles when no one else could. But Calder knew better. Holt had been something else once, a Union medic during the war, a witness to men at their worst and their breaking point. He saw things, and maybe more importantly, remembered them. Calder needed someone who remembered. When he reached the chapel house, the place was quiet except for the sound of wind brushing over tall grass. A pair of goats stood tied to a post near the porch, chewing with slow indifference. The bell was missing its clapper. The steps creaked under Calder's boots as he dismounted and knocked. The door opened without sound. Holt stood there, tall and gaunt, the kind of thin that comes from years of making do. His hair was white and pulled back, his shirt tucked neat, his eyes sharp behind worn spectacles. Calder Boone, he said, voice like gravel dipped in honey.
Well now, this ain't a social call. No, sir, Calder said. It's not.
Holt stepped aside without asking questions.
Come in, tea's still hot.
The inside smelled of cedar and old paper. Crosses lined the wall, some carved, some painted, one made from a broken rifle barrel. Books were stacked in odd towers around the room. Calder sat in the chair Holt gestured to, and accepted the tin cup of tea, though he didn't drink.
She alive?
Holt asked, settling across from him.
She is. Then I reckon I know why you're here.
Calder nodded once.
Lena May Calder. She says Wade Talbot's been after her for months. I believe her. Of course you do. You've seen him before.
Called it.
How he treats women.
Holt's face didn't change, but something cold entered his voice.
I've seen Wade Talbot since he was a boy. Learned early that if he couldn't buy it, he'd break it. That sort of man doesn't age out of cruelty. She said he was going to hurt her.
Called.
Worse than he already did, and he nearly did. Left her to die outside my south pasture. You think folks in Dustwell do anything about it?
Calder exhaled hard through his nose.
No, sheriff's bought. Judge is scared. Most people don't want to get involved. And you?
Holt asked, eyes narrowing. Calder looked down at the tea cooling in his hands.
I got involved the minute I picked her up out of the dirt.
For a moment, the room held nothing but the tick of the old clock on the shelf. Holt leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees.
You want me to testify?
He said.
Say what I know. You saw something once.
Calder.
Didn't you? A girl, few years back.
Holt nodded slowly.
Talbot cornered her behind the general store. Thought nobody saw. He hit her when she screamed. Not hard, just enough to scare. I stepped in. Took a beating for my trouble. Did she ever speak up? She left town 2 days later. Never came back. Folks barely remembered her name by the end of the week.
Calder looked him dead in the eye.
That ain't gonna happen this time.
Holt didn't smile, but something in his posture shifted, approval, maybe, or a recognition of purpose. He stood crossed to a shelf, pulled down a leather journal.
I wrote about it,
he said.
Back then, when it was fresh. Names, dates, time of day, I keep records.
Calder took the book, thumbing through careful handwriting.
You'd swear this under oath? I would. Holt. But that don't mean anyone will listen. They'll listen to the marshal,
Calder said.
I'm sending for him.
Holt raised a white brow.
That's so. If the sheriff won't act, someone above him has to. You're stacking the deck,
Holt said, not disapproving.
That girl must mean something.
Calder's fingers tightened around the journal.
She's been through hell, and she still stood up. She deserves someone to do the same.
Holt looked at him for a long, long moment.
You sound like a man who's already made peace with dying. Not,
Calder said.
But fighting, yeah.
The old reverend walked to the window, looking out at the land.
You're not the first to stand against a man like Talbot. Most break. A few bleed. But if you do it clean, do it righteous, sometimes the land remembers. Sometimes it changes.
Calder.
Then I'll bleed clean if I have to.
He tucked the journal into his coat, shook Holt's hand.
Thank you,
he said.
Don't thank me,
replied.
Just make sure she walks away from this with more than scars.
Outside, the sky was beginning to cloud. Not a storm, just that dusty gray Texas dusk that settled in without warning. Calder mounted his horse and turned back toward Red Creek, the Reverend's voice echoing behind him.
If you fight this alone, you'll die with the truth.
The ride back was slower. He took the long way home, cutting across the old trail behind the ridgeline. His mind replayed Lena's face the night before, bruised but defiant. The way she'd looked at him when she said Talbot would come. Not if, when. She knew what kind of men never let go. And so did Calder. Red Creek Ranch came into view just before sunset, its silhouette bold against the orange sky, smoke curled from the chimney. Warmth, light, life. He wondered if Lena had been able to sleep. If Ma Hattie had gotten her to eat. If Jude had asked too many questions. As he rode into the yard, Jude came running from the barn.
You're back! Someone came by!
Calder's heart skipped.
Who? Messenger from Dustwell. Said the judge wanted to see you. When? Tomorrow morning. Said it was important.
Calder dismounted, handing the reins off.
Where's Lena? Inside. She's walking a little now.
That was good. But if word had already reached the judge, That meant things were moving faster than expected. Talbot wouldn't wait long, and Calder had just lit the fuse by riding to Holt. He walked inside to find Lena sitting in the parlor, legs tucked up beneath a borrowed blanket, eyes sharper than they had any right to be for a woman recovering from a beating.
"You found someone," she said quietly.
He nodded.
"Holt's willing to speak. Wrote everything down."
Lena blinked fast, looking away for a second.
"That means a lot." "You don't have to thank me. I'm not,"
she said, then gave a half smile.
"I'm just trying to remember what trust feels like."
Calder didn't answer. He sat across from her, laid the journal on the table between them.
"I'm riding into town tomorrow,"
he said.
"The judge wants a word."
She.
"Alone. For now. You think it's a trap. I think Talbot's watching every move we make, and I think he's planning his next one."
She pulled the blanket tighter around her.
"Then we better be ready."
Calder met her eyes.
"We're getting there."
He stood to stoke the fire. Behind him the wind picked up again outside. It wasn't a storm yet, but it would be.
"If you fight this alone,"
Holt had said,
"you'll die with the truth."
But Calder Boone wasn't alone anymore, and this truth, it was going to be loud. The rain came just before dawn. Soft at first, almost apologetic, tapping on the tin roof of Red Creek Ranch like it was asking permission. Inside the house, the world stirred slowly. Calder Boone had already been up for an hour, boots on, staring out the front window with coffee going cold in his hand. The judge's message had sat like a rock in his gut all night. Lena had barely slept, though she tried to hide it. Calder could tell by the tension in her shoulders and the way her eyes never fully rested. Fear didn't always scream. Sometimes it just lingered behind your ribs and waited. My Hattie had fussed over breakfast and sent Calder out with a packed tin and 2 warnings. Don't trust the judge, and don't let Dustwell pull him down with it. He rode in through slick roads and wet wind, coat pulled tight, hat brim low. The courthouse sat at the far end of town, square and stubborn looking, like it knew its job and didn't like it. Judge Edwin Holloway was a thin man with sharp knuckles and thinning hair, and he had a reputation for doing the right thing when it didn't cost too much. Calder walked into his office and closed the door behind him. The judge looked up from a neat stack of papers.
"Sit down."
Calder stayed standing.
"You wanted to see me."
Holloway didn't flinch.
"You've been stirring the pot. If that means dragging a woman out of the dirt and stopping her from bleeding to death, sure."
Holloway sighed, leaned back in his chair.
"I heard what happened, and I believe you."
That surprised Calder, but he didn't let it show. Holloway continued.
"I also know Wade Talbot owns more land than anyone from here to Clear Ridge. His cattle drive bankrolls this town's winter, and his name is on half the donation plaques in that church across the street. Doesn't make him innocent. Doesn't make him guilty, either."
Holloway shot back.
"At least not in a way I can prove. Not unless someone steps forward."
Calder reached into his coat and set Reverend Holt's journal on the desk.
"This is a start. Holt's ready to swear by it. And I got Patrick Sullivan, from the Painted Mare, willing to testify he saw Lena run after Talbot accused her. He found the missing coin later. Talbot dropped it himself."
The judge studied the journal for a long beat, then tapped his fingers on the desk.
"It's compelling. But if I move forward, you understand what comes next."
Calder didn't blink.
"I do? You'll be marked. So will Lena. Talbot doesn't forgive. That makes 2 of us."
The judge exhaled slowly.
"I can request a territorial marshal, but it'll take time. Maybe a week." "We don't have a week." "Then stall him. Keep her hidden. Keep your head down."
Calder shook his head.
"That's not what this is."
The judge leaned forward.
"You want Justice Boone. Fine. But don't expect the whole town to stand with you. Dustwell's not built for heroes."
Calder turned to go, pausing at the door.
"No, sir. But maybe it's time it remembers how to build one."
When he rode back into Red Creek, the sky had begun to clear. The land looked washed, renewed, almost, but the air still held something heavy. He stabled the horse, walked through the back entrance, and found Lena in the kitchen with Ma Hattie, sipping tea like it was the only thing keeping her upright.
"You're back early."
Lena said.
"Judge is requesting a marshal,"
Calder replied.
"Could be days."
She nodded like she expected as much. Her face was calm, but her fingers were tight around the mug.
He'll come before that. Yeah.
My Hattie glanced between them.
So what now?
Calder turned to Lena.
Now we talk.
They moved to the sitting room, the fire still crackling low from the morning chill. Calder sat across from her, elbows on his knees.
I need to know everything. Not just what happened, but what he said, what he did, what he wanted.
Lena looked down, her voice came slow but steady.
He watched me every night at the saloon. Wouldn't let anyone else serve him. Started following me home. Said he liked my fire. Said he'd break it if I didn't come around. I tried to get the owner to say something, but he just told me to be polite. Smile more. She took a breath. The day before he beat me, he grabbed my wrist so hard I dropped a tray. I told him to leave me alone. He told me, "You're mine whether you like it or not. And if you make me chase you, I'll make sure you never walk again."
Calder's jaw tightened.
And then he accused you of theft. I knew it was coming,
she whispered.
He made sure I'd be alone when it happened. He waited until the saloon emptied. Said I took something, grabbed me, and shoved me through the back door. I ran. You didn't see who hit you. No, just the first blow. After that it was boots, fists, the ground.
She rubbed her wrist without thinking, and Calder saw the old bruise there, half faded but never forgotten.
I didn't just think I was gonna die,
she said.
I wanted.
Her voice broke just for a second. Calder leaned forward.
You didn't. You're here. And he didn't break you.
Lena wiped her eye.
He's not finished. No,
Calder said.
But neither are we.
There was a beat of silence. Then she looked up.
I want to shoot,
she said. He blinked.
What? I want to be able to shoot. If he comes here again, I don't want to just wait behind a window. I want to stand.
Calder held her gaze, searching for doubt. There wasn't any.
All right,
he said.
We'll start tomorrow.
That night the fire burned long. Jude cleaned the guns, Hattie locked every window twice, and Lena stood at the door for 10 full minutes, just staring out into the dark. She didn't flinch when a coyote howled nearby. Later, when the house had gone quiet and Calder was the last one awake, he found himself in the same chair, watching the same front window. Something had changed. Not just in Lena, but in him too. He thought of his wife, long buried. Of the son he'd never seen grow tall. Of the years he spent letting the world pass him by, keeping his head down, building fences and feeding cattle. And now a woman with broken bones wanted to learn how to fight. And she was under his roof, and she trusted him to teach her.
He didn't just beat me,
Lena had said, voice flat.
He was getting ready to take everything.
Calder poured one last cup of coffee, still hot from the pot. He didn't drink it. He just stared into the dark and made a promise. He wasn't going to let anyone take anything else. Not from her. Not from this land. Not ever again.
He didn't just beat me,
Lena said, voice flat.
He was getting ready to take everything.
The sky was overcast, thick with low, hanging clouds, but the rain had held off. A blessing, Calder figured as he handed Lena the small Colt revolver and stepped back. They were standing behind the barn, far enough from the house that the noise wouldn't spook the animals or the people inside. Calder had set up 3 empty glass jars on a fence post. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't have to be. This was about more than aim. Lena adjusted her stance, eyes on the gun like it was something alive. Her hand trembled a little as she gripped it.
You ever shoot before?
Calder asked.
No,
she said, eyes never leaving the jars.
But I've been angry before.
He almost smiled.
Start slow. Focus on the sight, not the target. Don't jerk the trigger, squeeze it.
She nodded, raised the pistol and fired. The shot rang out sharp, cutting through the morning stillness. The first jar remained untouched. She exhaled sharp.
Missed. Doesn't matter. Again.
She fired, and missed again. But her hand didn't shake as much this time. Her shoulders squared. She adjusted her grip. On the third shot, the jar exploded in a flash of glass and dust. She lowered the pistol, eyes wide, chest rising fast.
There you go,
Calder said quietly.
I thought it would feel.
She trailed off, searching for the word.
Different. Less personal,
she said.
But it doesn't.
She reloaded, and they kept going. By the time the sun had reached its high point, she was hitting more than she missed. Her arms ached, her jaw was tight, and sweat matted strands of hair to her face. But she never once asked to stop. At lunch, Ma Hattie brought sandwiches out to the porch. Lena didn't say much. She ate like she was storing strength, not just feeding hunger. Later that afternoon, Calder walked her through how to clean the gun. The moment her hands touched the cloth, something in her expression changed: focus, control, purpose.
She's a fast learner,
Ma Hattie said quietly to Calder as they watched from the doorway.
She has reason to be. She also has fire,
Hattie added.
and she ain't gonna waste it.
That night, after the dishes were done and Jude had gone to bed, Calder found Lena out by the corral, watching the horses. The wind had picked up, dry and restless. A storm wasn't coming, not yet, but the land felt unsettled. He stepped up beside her.
You remember the first time someone tried to make you feel small?
She asked without looking at him. Calder nodded slowly.
Yeah. I was 12.
She said.
A drunk ranch hand in El Paso told my father that a girl couldn't haul water and ought to be married off by 15. I dumped the whole bucket on his boots.
He laughed once, low and honest.
What'd your pa do? Bought me pie that night. Told me never to let a man decide my size. You haven't,
Calder said. She finally looked at him. Her voice dropped.
But Talbot tried.
Calder's jaw clenched.
He's gonna try again.
She didn't ask how he knew. They both did.
He'll come in the night,
she said.
He's the type. Or send someone else first,
Cal did.
That's his way. Get someone else's hands dirty.
Lena crossed her arms, eyes on the dark fields beyond the ranch.
We should be ready by tomorrow.
Calder turned to her, serious now.
You already are.
She gave a small nod.
I'm not just surviving this time, Calder. I'm meeting it head on.
He believed her. Back in the house, they locked the doors and bolted the windows. Calder took the shotgun down from above the mantel and set it near the front door. Jude was told to stay in his room if he heard anything. Ma Hattie moved like it was muscle memory, preparing, waiting, guarding. By midnight, the wind had gone still. Calder sat in his chair by the front window, rifle across his lap, eyes on the darkness. Lena sat across from him, her revolver holstered at her hip now. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Sometime past 2, a branch cracked out near the shed. Calder stood instantly. So did Lena. He motioned for silence, moved to the door, opened it just enough to step onto the porch. The air was cold but still. No sound, no movement. Then came the second noise. Not a branch, hoof beats, faint but close. Lena stepped up behind him.
See anything?
She whispered. He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the tree line beyond the fence. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement, the shimmer of a rider pausing at the edge of the property. One rider. Watching. They didn't call out, didn't move forward. Then, just as quietly, they turned and disappeared into the trees. Calder exhaled slowly.
They're scouting,
he muttered.
Checking how many of us there are.
Lena's hand hovered near her hip.
Which means the next time,
she said.
They won't come to look.
He nodded once.
They'll come to finish it.
She met his eyes.
Let them,
she said, voice steady.
Let them come.
The morning after the rider came and went was sharper, colder, like the wind knew something the people hadn't said out loud yet. Red Creek Ranch sat quiet, but tense, the silence drawn tight like a wire waiting to snap. Calder Boone was already outside at first light, walking the perimeter. His boots sunk slightly in the damp soil, and his eyes scanned every fence post, every shadow. He checked the south line twice. That was where they'd come from, if they came. By the time he made it back to the barn, Lena was already there, cleaning her revolver on a wooden crate.
You didn't sleep either,
Calder said. She didn't look up.
Didn't want to.
He nodded.
We've got 2, maybe 3 days before the marshal comes. And I'd bet anything Talbot won't wait that long.
She looked at him now.
What do you need me to do?
He appreciated how she said it, straightforward. No fear in her voice anymore. Just clarity.
I need someone watching the north pasture. If he sends scouts again, they might try a different route. I can do that. I know.
Ma Hattie brought them both coffee not long after. Jude helped board up the windows tighter, asking just once if he'd still be allowed to go fishing when this was over. Calder ruffled the boy's hair and told him,
You'll catch more fish than you know what to do with.
By noon, Calder rode into town again, not to warn, not to plead. Just to be seen, let Talbot know he wasn't hiding. He stopped at the general store, bought extra shells and supplies, and let word slip that the marshal had already been contacted. He spoke to one or two of the townsfolk on the street, not about justice, but about truth, who Lena was, what really happened, and who Talbot really was underneath the suits and gold rings. Some listened, some didn't. Dustwell had a long memory for the wrong things and a short spine for the right ones. At the Painted Mare, Patrick Sullivan met him at the back door.
You really think this'll stick?
He asked, voice low.
It's already stuck,
Calder replied.
Talbot just doesn't know it yet.
Sullivan swallowed hard.
You need a man, I'll ride if it comes to that.
Calder nodded.
Thank you.
He left town by sundown, riding slow, letting every eye see him on the road home. No fear, no flinching. He passed Talbot's ranch in the distance and didn't turn his head, though he felt the weight of eyes from the porch. There was a quiet promise in that look, unfinished business. Back at Red Creek, the air felt heavier. Storm or not, something was coming. Lena met him at the barn again.
You were gone too long,
she said.
Had to plant some seeds. You think they'll grow? No, but I'll burn the weeds either way.
She handed him a folded piece of paper.
What's this? A map,
she said.
I spent part of the day sketching it from what I remember. Of the mare, Talbot's routes, where his men usually ride out from.
Calder unfolded it. Her handwriting was clean, deliberate.
You got a good head for planning,
he said.
I had to,
she replied.
Survival isn't luck, it's strategy.
He tucked the map into his coat and looked out toward the hills. The sun had already dipped behind them. Just light enough left to make out movement, and that's when he saw it. A rider, two, no more than that, coming fast from the ridge. He whistled sharp and short. Lena knew the signal and bolted for the house. Calder waited, hand on his rifle, until the figures came into view. Not Talbot, not yet. Scouts again. This time they didn't stop at the tree line. They came closer, brazen. He raised the rifle, took one clean shot over their heads, not to kill, to warn. They turned hard, horses kicking up dust, and vanished into the scrub brush. Lena was already on the porch when he returned.
They're testing you,
she said.
No,
Calder muttered.
They're watching who's willing to fight.
Mahati came out behind them, shotgun in her hands, apron still on.
Then let them see everything. Let them know we're ready.
Calder looked at Lena, at Mahati, at the warm windows behind them, and then out at the road that would eventually bring Wade Talbot. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about not bending, about putting something solid in the ground and saying no more. He spent that night with his rifle close and his heart steady. Around the ranch, torches were lit. Lena took a shift at the back, Mahati in the front parlor with her shotgun and a pot of coffee. Jude slept in the cellar, safe but restless. And when the wind picked up again around midnight, Calder didn't look toward the storm. He looked toward the ridge, where fires had started flickering in the distance. Campfires, at least 6 of them. Talbot wasn't just testing anymore, he was coming.
This isn't about land anymore,
Calder said, voice low.
It's about who owns the fear.
The firelight on the ridgeline didn't flicker out by morning. If anything, more torches had joined the first. Calder counted at least a dozen small camps spread along the high edge of Talbot's land, close enough to see Red Creek but far enough to wait without committing. Talbot wasn't charging in, guns drawn. He was circling slowly like a vulture. Calder stood on the front porch with binoculars in hand, coat collar pulled up against the cold. Lena came up beside him, tying her hair back, revolver on her hip. She didn't ask what the lights meant. She already knew.
They're baiting us,
she said.
They're waiting for me to flinch,
Calder replied.
Or come out there swinging,
she paused.
Are we? Not yet.
He looked over at her, noting the steadiness in her eyes. Just a few days ago, she'd been laid up in that spare room, broken and half-conscious. Now she stood like a soldier. That kind of strength didn't come from luck. It came from pain that had been shaped into resolve.
I've got eyes on them,
she said.
Watch their patterns before sunup. 2 of them keep circling off west. Might be looking for a way in. South line's weakest, Calder said. I'll double the posts there.
My Hattie appeared in the doorway behind them, holding a hot cup of coffee and a sawed-off shotgun. She handed both to Calder without a word, then went to check the cellar where Jude had spent another uneasy night. Calder sipped the coffee, letting it warm his gut.
Word spreading, he said. People in town are nervous. Some are pretending they don't know what's coming. Others they just want it over.
Lena folded her arms.
You think they'll help?
He shook his head.
Not unless they see someone take the first punch and stand back up. Then we give them that.
He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. She was already moving toward the barn. By noon the wind shifted. A rider came down from the ridge with a white cloth tied to his saddle horn. Calder saw him through the scope and met him halfway with Lena riding at his side. The rider was one of Talbot's men, Jarvis Bell, a wiry, sunburnt man with a twitchy jaw and a mouth full of false confidence.
Got a message. Boss wants a meeting.
Calder crossed his arms.
Now's not a good time for social calls.
Jarvis smirked.
He's offering you a way out. You hand over the girl, and he lets this place be.
Lena spoke up, tone like cold steel.
You can ride back and tell him I'm not something to be handed over.
Jarvis barely looked at her.
He ain't the kind of man to wait long. Then he can stop playing games and show up himself, Calder said. But you tell him this, if he crosses my line, he better be ready to finish what he starts.
Jarvis snorted, but there was unease in his eyes.
Reckon you'll regret saying no.
Calder stepped forward real close.
Reckon you'll regret riding down here next time.
Jarvis turned his horse and rode hard back up the ridge. Calder and Lena rode back slower.
He's testing you,
she said.
No,
Calder answered.
He's trying to convince himself I'm bluffing. Are you?
He looked at her.
Not even close.
That night, Calder gathered everyone inside the house, the small family they'd become. Ma Hattie sat at the kitchen table, cleaning her shotgun for the third time. Jude huddled near the fire with a blanket around his shoulders, wide-eyed but alert. Lena stood near the window watching the hills.
We need to make a decision,
Calder said.
About what?
Ma Hattie asked.
If they come tonight, we fight.
Lena'd.
You don't think he'll wait for the marshal? No, Talbot's not about law, he's about power. He needs to show Dustwell he still owns everything.
Hattie leaned back, quiet for a moment.
Then I suppose it's time we remind him what can't be bought.
Calder nodded.
We make a stand here. If he wants blood, he'll have to take it the hard way.
They fortified the house until well after dark. Every window covered, every rifle loaded. Calder walked the perimeter once more. The air was dry charged. At midnight, the first gunshot cracked through the dark. Not close, just loud enough to be heard. A signal. Then came the second. Closer, they were coming. Calder took position at the front, Lena at the side window, Ma Hattie guarding the back door. Jude stayed low in the pantry, quiet as stone. Through the rifle scope, Calder saw movement 5, maybe 6 men. They weren't charging. Not yet. They were flanking, testing every inch of the line.
Hold,
he said under his breath. Then a shout came from outside.
You've got one chance, Boone. Give her up.
Lena didn't move. Didn't blink. Calder answered through the window loud and clear.
She's not yours to take.
Silence. Gunfire. A burst of it from the west. They were trying to draw them out. Calder motioned to Lena to stay put and circled around the inside of the house, checking every window. One man had made it to the fence. Another behind the water trough. Calder took the first shot. The man dropped fast. Not dead, but wounded loud enough to let the others know it wouldn't be easy. Gunfire tore across the yard now. The ranch lit with muzzle flashes and shouted threats. The air filled with smoke and fear and dust. Inside, Lena returned fire from the parlor, taking out one who tried to flank from the side. They came in waves, and every time Red Creek held. But it wouldn't hold forever. Then a quiet. Stillness. Calder exhaled, chest heaving. Lena stepped beside him, face streaked with sweat and smoke.
You still think they're trying to scare us? No,
he said. And then, from the front they heard it, a voice. Calm, confident. Wade Talbot.
Calder Boone,
he called.
You've made your point.
Calder raised the rifle but didn't fire. Not yet. Talbot's voice carried, smooth and arrogant.
You've got guts. I'll give you that. But guts don't win wars. Money does. Men do, and I've got both.
Calder shouted back, loud enough to shake the porch.
Then you better bring every damn dollar and every damn man, because we're still standing.
And in the silence that followed, everyone knew this wasn't over. But it had begun. The fires had died down by morning, but the smoke still lingered. The yard at Red Creek was a mess, scattered shell casings, a busted fence post, blood in the dirt. Calder Boone stood at the gate, watching the horizon through glassy eyes that hadn't slept. The wind had shifted overnight. The air smelled of gunpowder and burned grass. They had pushed Talbot's men back, for now. Lena stood behind him, coat thrown over her shoulders, face pale but unshaken. Ma Hattie was inside patching up Jude, who'd scraped his arm climbing out of the cellar after the gunfire ended. The house was still standing, they all were. But it wasn't over. Calder turned slowly.
He'll come again.
Lena nodded.
And next time, he won't bring 6 men. He'll bring a storm.
Calder looked out toward Dustwell.
Which means we bring one first.
She frowned.
What are you thinking? I'm done playing defense.
An hour later they saddled up. Just Calder and Lena. Hattie protested, but he cut her off with a look that said everything. Jude stayed quiet, eyes wide, clutching the rifle Ma had left by the kitchen table. They didn't ride fast, they rode with purpose. Dustwell sat still in the morning light. A few townsfolk peeked from windows as the pair rode down Main Street. 2 riders, no fear. Calder dismounted in front of the painted mare. Lena followed him inside. The saloon was half empty. Patrick Sullivan stood behind the bar, drying glasses like it was any other Thursday. But the look on his face changed the second he saw Lena. She walked up steady.
You ready to make this count?
Sullivan nodded once.
I'm ready.
Spoke low.
You still have those deposit ledgers.
Patrick tapped a crate under the bar.
Every payment Talbot's made. Every one he didn't. We'll need M,
Calder said.
And you.
Sullivan looked around.
They'll come for me. They already will. Might as well hit first.
They rode next to the church. Reverend Holt stood at the steps, watching them like he'd been waiting. Calder held up the journal.
You still stand by it?
Holt's eyes didn't blink.
I've been waiting years to say this part out loud.
They took both men to the courthouse. Lena walked beside them head high. Judge Holloway opened the doors himself.
I thought you'd wait for the marshal,
he said. Calder handed over the journal.
I'm not waiting for anyone anymore.
Sullivan laid the ledgers on the judge's desk. Holt?
I saw Talbot strike that girl 3 years ago behind the general store. I intervened. I was beat for it. I wrote it down and kept quiet. I was wrong to wait.
Sullivan followed.
He accused Lena of theft. I watched him manhandle her. I saw the coin pouch. He said she stole Fall from his own coat later that night.
Lena didn't say a word. She just looked at the judge, eyes daring him to pretend it wasn't enough. Judge Holloway exhaled.
With this, I can issue a warrant. But it'll take days for proper deputies. Talbot won't come easy. He already didn't,
Calder said.
Last night he brought men, guns, fired at my house, my family.
Hollowayed.
Then this is already war. It's about to be.
He signed the warrant anyway, sealed it with a shaking hand.
You won't survive this,
he told Calder.
You know that, right?
Calder took the paper, folded it into his coat.
You don't survive cowards like Talbot by waiting. You survive by making him the one who bleeds first.
The tension held like the sky before lightning silence, swollen, ready to tear. Wade Talbot stood on the porch of his grand estate, surrounded by hired guns who now looked more like scared farmhands than soldiers. Behind Calder Boone, a growing crowd from Dustwell had gathered, Judge Holloway, Reverend Holt, Patrick Sullivan, and a scattering of ranchers and townsfolk who had finally found their spine. But there was no applause, no cheering. Just heat, dust, and the weight of something about to break. Calder didn't lower the warrant. He didn't move at all. The silence dragged. Then Talbot laughed. It wasn't the sharp bark of a man amused. It was something darker. The laugh of someone who didn't believe he could lose.
You think this matters?
Talbot's voice rang out, echoing off the porch beams.
You think a signature and a few scared faces change anything?
He stepped down a single stair, slow and deliberate.
You came here thinking this ends with me in chains. You came with a piece of paper and a preacher.
Calder didn't blink.
I came with the truth. And more than that, I came with people who remember what decency looks like.
Talbot spat in the dirt.
Decency don't keep cattle fed. Decency doesn't build towns. Fear does.
Judge Holloway raised his voice now, clear and official.
Wade Talbot, under the laws of this territory, you are hereby ordered to stand trial for assault, attempted murder, and conspiracy to cause harm under color of influence. Surrender peacefully, or force will be used.
Talbot didn't move. The men behind him shifted unsure. Lena stepped forward.
You know what you did. And you're not walking away from it this time.
He sneered at her.
You think one girl changes the world.
She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Behind her, the riders from town had stopped being a crowd. They were aligned now, united, quiet, focused. And for the first time in a long time, Talbot looked uncertain. He turned to his men.
Shoot these bastards if they take one more step.
But no one raised a rifle. One of the guards, a younger man with a badge from another county, slowly lowered his gun and took 2 steps back. Then another followed, and another. Calder raised his voice.
You're outnumbered, Wade. Outlawed. You make one move, it'll be your last.
Talbot's jaw twitched. For a heartbeat, he looked ready to lunge. Then, like a man who'd swallowed broken glass, he backed up 1 step. Just one. Then turned, walked back into the house and slammed the door. The moment held. Calder turned to Judge Holloway.
He won't run tonight, but he will run. I'll issue a blockade order. Get word to the marshal in the next town. We'll hold him until then.
Calder's.
You've got enough men here now.
The judge nodded, shaky but resolute. People began to move. Patrick Sullivan stepped off his horse and pulled out the ledgers again. Holt followed with the journal. The courthouse would finally get the evidence it had ignored for too long. Calder stayed behind, his eyes never leaving that closed door. Lena rode up beside him.
You think he'll come out again? Not until he figures out how to twist it in his favor. He's not done, but he's rattled.
She looked at the house.
Then we just made the first real crack.
They rode back to Red Creek by sunset. The air had changed, not lighter but clearer. Like something rotten had been cut open and drained. Mahadi met them at the gate, Judah asleep on her hip. She didn't ask what happened. She just said,
We ready for what's next?
Calder nodded.
He'll strike again. But now he's desperate. And desperate men make sloppy choices.
That night, as the fire crackled low and the house stood quiet, Calder sat in the front room sharpening a knife. He wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but he believed in preparation. He looked across the room at Lena. She sat with a blanket over her lap, but her eyes were alive, watchful.
You all right?
He asked. She nodded slowly.
I was afraid that no one would listen. That speaking out would make it worse. And now, I still don't know how it ends,
she said.
But at least it's not ending in silence.
Calder leaned back in the chair, nodding. The quiet stretched between them, not empty but earned. Outside an all called. Distant. Then quiet. He stood. Locked? Bolted. The wind picked up outside, not a storm. Not yet. Just the sound of something shifting.
You came here thinking this ends with me in chains,
Talbot had said. But he was wrong. This wasn't about how it ended. It was about how it would never go back to the way it was.
I still don't know how it ends,
Lena whispered.
But at least it's not ending in silence.
The next day broke colder than the ones before, the kind of dry cold that settled in your bones and stayed. Calder Boone woke early, muscles stiff, rifle already loaded beside him. He didn't sleep much anymore, not since Talbot had shown his hand. Red Creek Ranch stood quiet, too quiet. The townspeople had returned home after the standoff, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. Waiting, like the last breath before a gunfight. Lena was already up when Calder came into the kitchen. She'd tied her hair back again, sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee cradled between her hands. The scar near her temple had faded some, but not the fire in her eyes.
You feel it?
She asked, without looking up.
Yeah,
Calder replied.
Something's coming.
He sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Mahadi stepped in with her shawl pulled tight.
Duswell's too quiet,
she said like she was thinking out loud.
Even the drunks ain't staggering out of the mare. Talbot's buying time, Calder said. But he ain't the type to let the law settle anything. You think he's planning to run?
Lena.
No?
Calder answered.
He's planning to finish this.
They rode into town by mid-morning, keeping low and moving slow. When they reached the edge of Dustwell, Calder could tell something was off. The streets were nearly empty. The general store's windows were shuttered. The saloon was closed. The church bell hadn't rung. It wasn't fear. It was avoidance. People were watching, but from behind curtains and half-closed doors. Calder stopped at the courthouse. Judge Holloway met him on the steps, pale and sweating.
They broke in last night,
the judge said.
What? The courthouse, records room. Someone torched it. The warrant gone. So's Holt's journal, the ledgers, all of it.
Calder stepped back, breath slow.
Talbot. I've got no proof,
the judge said quickly.
But it's no coincidence. Where the hell was the sheriff? Off at the county line, called away, conveniently.
Lena stood on the edge of the step, arms folded.
He's trying to erase the trail.
Judge Holloway nodded.
He knows the marshal's close. Days, maybe less. He wants this dead and buried before help arrives.
Calder looked down the street.
Then we don't wait for the marshal.
Lena turned to him.
You're going to confront him? Not yet,
Calder said.
We let him believe it worked. Let him think we're crawling back to Red Creek, licking our wounds. Let him get comfortable.
Holloway frowned.
And then we hit him where it hurts.
They left Dustwell under gray skies. On the ride back, Lena asked the question she'd been holding in.
Are you sure you want to do this your way?
Calder kept his eyes ahead.
There's no law left to lean on. Only truth, and truth needs a push sometimes.
That night they made their plan. Mahatty pulled out an old map of the southern ridge, back trails, dry riverbeds, ways into the Talbot estate that weren't watched by hired guns. Jude offered to help. Calder told him no, but he saw the way the boys' fists clenched. They packed light. Guns, tools, not for a fight, for exposure. If Talbot wanted to bury the truth, they'd drag it back into daylight. At midnight, Calder and Lena left the house. Jude hugged them both without asking. Hattie just said,
Don't come back empty.
They took the south trail, hugging the tree line. It was darker there, quieter, no moon. Talbot's ranch was quiet too, no patrols, no lights. Too quiet. They snuck in through the east paddock. Lena led them to the tool shed near the main barn. That's where Talbot kept records, ledgers, bribes, land deeds, blackmail files. The paper trail no fire could reach. Inside the shed it took them less than 5 minutes to find a locked cabinet. Calder popped it open with a crowbar. Dozens of letters, faked reports, payment slips, Judge Hinn property transfers with falsified names, and beneath it all pictures of Lena, of Sullivan, even Reverend Holt. Surveillance. Control. Calder looked at her.
He's been doing this for years.
She didn't answer. She just kept digging. Then she pulled out one page and stopped cold. It was a list, names. Next to each an amount. And a single word.
Owed.
She turned to Calder, voice tight.
These are debts. Blood ones. Every woman who tried to leave. Every man who crossed him.
It wasn't just blackmail. It was a hit list. They took it all. Stuffed every piece of proof into a leather satchel and slipped back out into the dark. But as they neared the edge of the paddock, Calder heard it. A twig snap, he froze. Then voices.
Check the shed.
Lena pulled her revolver. Calder grabbed her arm.
Run, we split up. No.
He shoved the satchel into her hands.
If one of us makes it out, that's enough.
She stared at him, furious. Then she nodded and ran. He turned and bolted the opposite direction, drawing fire as he moved. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't stop. He led them toward the dry creek bed, where cover was better. Behind him the shouts faded. When he reached the ridge, Lena was already there, breathless, satchel clutched tight.
You're bleeding,
she said.
It's just a scratch. You always say that.
They didn't stop until they made it back to Red Creek. By dawn, the evidence was spread out across the kitchen table. Mahatty sorted it. Jude watched like his life depended on it. It did. Lena stood at the window, watching the light return over the hills. And Calder sat back, breathing hard, shoulders still bleeding, eyes locked on one piece of paper, the list. One name circled in red, Wade Talbot.
He didn't just try to silence us, said. He built his empire on the backs of the dead. And now we tear it down, one name at a time.
The sun was barely up, but Red Creek was already moving like a war camp. Calder sat shirtless at the kitchen table, Mahadi stitching up the wound on his shoulder with a hand steadier than any doctor's. He didn't flinch, not from the needle, not from the sting. His eyes stayed fixed on the map Lena had rolled out across the table, her finger circling points of entry, fallback paths, and weak lines on Talbot's estate. Jude watched from the stairwell, quiet, trying to memorize every word. No one spoke about fear anymore. It had settled deep enough that it became part of them, like breath, like memory. "This," Lena said, tapping the corner of the map where the fence line curved near the cattle run.
"This is where he's weakest. You hit from there, you split his men."
Calder grunted.
"It's also where they'll expect us now. But not with the town,"
she added.
"Not with everyone."
He looked at her.
"You sure they'll come?"
She straightened.
"After what they saw in that shed. After what he did to Holt, to Patrick, to all those names on that damn list. Yeah, I think they will."
Calder.
"Then we call them."
By noon they rode into Dustwell. This time they didn't come quiet. They came loud. Lena walked into the painted mare with the satchel and dumped it on the bar. Patrick Sullivan opened it, saw the records, the photos, the list, and turned to face the crowd that had already begun to gather.
"He's burned churches, bought judges, killed men, traded women like coin," he said. "And now we have the proof."
The saloon went still. Reverend Holt stepped forward, laying his hand on the satchel like it was scripture.
"Justice isn't just a word," he said. "It's a weight. And we've let it slip from our shoulders too long."
By evening, more than 30 people had gathered in the churchyard. Men with worn rifles, women with grit in their bones, sons who remembered what their fathers couldn't say, daughters who had stopped waiting to be saved, and all of them were ready. Calder stood before them, not as a preacher or a sheriff, but as a man who'd drawn his line.
"We ride at dawn,"
he said.
"Not to kill, to end it."
Lena stepped up beside him, holding the list.
"We're not taking revenge,"
she said.
"We're reclaiming the truth. For everyone on this paper. For everyone who never got to come home."
The crowd didn't cheer. They just nodded. Because they knew. The night before the ride, Calder walked the edges of Red Creek one last time. The wind was soft, but steady. A reminder. The kind that told you the world wouldn't stop turning after all this. That tomorrow still waited. Lena found him at the barn.
"You ready?"
she asked.
"No,"
he said honestly.
"But I'm going anyway."
She
"Sounds about right."
He looked at her then, really looked. The bruises on her face had faded, but not disappeared. Her hands were stronger now, her voice too. She hadn't just survived, she'd grown into something fierce.
"I ever tell you why I left the Rangers?"
Calder.
"No. Because they made peace with men like Talbot. Said justice wasn't always black and white. Said sometimes, you let the devil have his corner if it keeps the town quiet."
She waited.
"I believed that once. Until it cost me everything."
Lena nodded quiet.
"Well, now you get to rewrite that ending."
The next morning the riders formed at the edge of Dustwell. Judge Holloway handed Calder a second warrant, signed fresh, notarized by 3 witnesses, sealed with a bullet hole through the corner.
"Whatever happens,"
the judge said,
"this time the law's behind you."
Calder tucked it into his coat.
"It's about damn time."
They rode as the sun rose, dust kicking up behind them like a warning to the sky. Talbot's estate came into view just past the ridge. His men saw them coming, fast, organized. Too many to scare off this time. Lena rode in the front line, her hand on her revolver, face calm. When they stopped just out of rifle range, Calder raised his voice.
"Wade Talbot!"
It echoed across the field, no answer. Then Talbot stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't smiling now.
"You really brought the town." "We brought the truth,"
Calder said.
"And a warrant."
Talbot held up a shotgun.
"You bring a warrant to a war." "No,"
Calder replied.
"I bring one to an ending."
There was a beat of silence. Then a single gunshot cracked the stillness, not from Talbot's men, but from one of the townsfolk behind Calder. A warning, not aimed, just enough to say we're not backing down. Talbot's men wavered, and for the first time Calder saw it, fear, not in the hired hands, in Talbot. His power was breaking, and he knew it.
"You can't win this,"
Talbot shouted.
"You're just a man with a grudge!" "No,"
Calder said, loud enough for everyone to hear.
"I'm a man with the truth." And today, that's worth more than every bullet in your belt.
He raised the warrant in one hand, rifle in the other, and then he started walking.
We're not taking revenge,
Lena had said.
We're reclaiming the truth. For everyone on this paper. For everyone who never got to come home.
Calder's boots hit the dirt in slow, steady rhythm. The sun was rising behind him, casting long shadows over the open stretch of land between him and Wade Talbot's estate. Dustwell's people stood behind him like a living wall, no longer just townsfolk but witnesses. No one spoke, not even the wind. He walked alone. One hand held the signed warrant. The other gripped his rifle. Talbot didn't move from the porch. He stood like a cornered animal, still trying to look proud, but the fear was blooming behind his eyes. His men were scattered behind fences, beside barns, gripping rifles that now felt too heavy. Calder stopped just short of the main gate.
"This ends now, Wade,"
he said, loud enough for the whole ridge to hear.
"One way or the other."
Talbot's voice was hoarse when it came.
"You're bluffing."
Calder raised the warrant high, his eyes hard.
"This is justice. You can meet it standing, or you can crawl."
That was when the first shot cracked. Not from Talbot, not from Calder. From the tree line, one of Talbot's men panicked. The bullet tore into the dirt inches from Calder's boots. Before anyone else could move, Lena fired back, striking the gun clean from the shooter's hand. The standoff exploded into chaos. Gunfire lit the field. Townsfolk dropped behind wagons. Talbot's men scattered, some returning fire, others too scared to raise their rifles. Calder dropped into a crouch and fired, taking down a man near the stable roof. He could feel the heat of the sun on his neck, smell the acrid bite of gun smoke in the air. Behind him, Reverend Holt pulled Jude behind cover, shielding the boy's head as bullets shattered fence rails. Lena moved like she'd been born to it, flanking through the far edge of the paddock, calm, precise. Her revolver barked 3 times. 2 hits, 1 warning. My Hattie was on the porch of a nearby storage shed, firing her old shotgun with terrifying accuracy. She didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She just aimed and made her shots count. Calder pushed forward. He could see Talbot retreating inside, slamming the front door of the house. Coward. That was all he was now. All he'd ever been. A man who bought silence, then hid behind walls when it broke. Calder sprinted to the porch and kicked in the door with 1 boot. The house was dim, shadows creeping through the hall. He moved carefully. Rifle up.
"Talbot,"
he called.
"Come out and face it."
A shot rang out, missed by inches, splintering the banister near his head. Calder dropped, rolled, and fired toward the sound. Silence. He moved room to room, heart pounding steady. Then he found him. Wade Talbot, bleeding from the shoulder, crouched behind an overturned desk in what used to be his study.
"It didn't have to be like this,"
Talbot said through clenched teeth.
"You're right,"
Calder growled.
"You could have been a man a long time ago."
Talbot tried to raise his pistol. Calder fired first, clean through the hand. Talbot screamed, dropping the gun, cradling his wrist.
"You're under arrest,"
Calder said.
"And this time, you don't buy your way out."
Outside, the shooting had stopped. The town had won. Reverend Holt, Judge Holloway, and Sullivan entered minutes later. They took Talbot into custody, binding his hands with rope. No one celebrated. There was no cheering, no high fives, no victory parade. There was only breath, ragged, honest breath, the kind that said, "We made it." Later, as the fires died down and the people began tending to the wounded, Calder walked to the edge of the porch and looked out across the ranch. Lena joined him, dirt on her face, blood on her sleeve, but her eyes were clear.
"He begged,"
she said quietly. Calder nodded.
"He begged like they all do when they lose the only thing that made them powerful. I didn't kill him."
Calder.
"I know. I wanted to. I know that too."
She stood beside him in silence for a moment. Then she handed him the list, the one with names and debts and blood.
"I found this in the drawer,"
she said.
"One more name."
Calder looked. At the very bottom of the list, written in different ink, was a name he hadn't expected. Calder Boone. Next to it, paid in full. He stared at it. Lena looked at him.
"He thought he already broke you once."
Calder folded the paper slowly, tucked it into his coat.
"He did,"
he said.
"But I'm still here."
She smiled.
"So am I."
They turned to walk back toward Red Creek, leaving behind the burning lies and broken legacy of a man who built power on silence.
"I didn't kill him,"
Calder said.
But I ended him. There's a difference.
The wind moved slower now. It whispered through the dry grass at Red Creek, tugged gently at the corners of the porch roof, and rustled the clothes hanging quiet on the line out back. The sky was a clearer blue than it had been in weeks, wide, open, unbothered, like it was giving the land time to breathe. Calder Boone stood at the edge of the pasture, hat in hand, watching the sun rise over the ridge. The blood had long since been scrubbed from the dirt. The bullets had been picked out of the walls, the windows mended, the fences rebuilt. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't tension, it was peace. Lena stepped out of the house behind him, wiping her hands on a towel. She wore no gun, no bandage, no weight that didn't belong. Just calm, earned. Jude was up early, already running after a goat in the yard, barefoot, laughing.
"Fence'll need tightening come spring,"
Calder said. Lena shrugged.
"We've got time."
He looked over at her.
"You staying then?" "I haven't packed,"
she said, almost smiling.
"Unless you want me gone." "No,"
he said, shaking his head.
"You're not a guest anymore. You're home if you want it."
She folded her arms, leaning on the post beside him.
"Hard to believe it's really over." "It's not over,"
he replied.
"It's just quieter."
Down in Dustwell, the courthouse door stayed open these days. Judge Holloway ruled fairer. Reverend Holt preached louder. Patrick Sullivan reopened the Painted Mare, but now it served coffee in the morning and kept the ledgers in plain view. People talked more now, not just about Talbot, but about the things they'd kept buried, about fear, about pride, about choosing silence too many times. Red Creek got visitors, young girls from nearby towns asking questions. Men offering to help repair what had been broken. One woman, older, with a scar down her cheek and a past she didn't name, stayed the night and left a necklace behind as thanks. The land remembered, so did the people. One afternoon, Calder walked to the mailbox at the edge of the road and found an envelope stamped from the territorial marshal's office. Inside, a badge, not a request, not an offer, just a symbol. He stared at it a long time, turning it in his fingers. He didn't put it on. He didn't need to. Later, sitting by the fire, Lena asked him what he'd do next.
"Build a better fence,"
he said. She raised an eyebrow.
"That all?" "No, maybe teach Jude how to shoot straight, fix that leaky roof in the barn, and maybe, just maybe, live like the worst part of me ain't the only part."
She smiled.
"You think we really changed anything?"
Calder thought for a long time, then he said,
"We showed Em it's possible. Even if just once. Once is enough. Truth's like fire, doesn't need much to spread."
The two of them sat in silence after that, the crackle of wood filling the space between. Outside, Jude laughed again, chasing a dog that hadn't been there 2 months ago. The ranch breathed. The story didn't end with a funeral, or a man hanging, or a final standoff drenched in blood. It ended with healing, slow, unforgiving, but real. And the truth was, maybe that's all a story like this ever needed to do, not fix everything, not make it easy, but remind folks that silence only wins when good people do nothing, and that justice, no matter how long it takes, will always ride back around. Even in the dust, sometimes justice ain't loud, sometimes it just stays.